I am absolutely thrilled that we were able to make it work to have Paul Hawken join us. As you will all know, he is one of the great thinkers and actors really in the environmental business, saving the world business is what I want to call it. So environmentalist, entrepreneur, author, activist, several books on the New York Times bestseller list. Really interesting background, which I would love to talk about before we get into the book, Paul, if that's all right. And he's here mainly to talk about his book, Regeneration, which came out last year, how to, and I'm going to pull it up, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation. If you haven't got it or haven't read it, you should, because it not only can you read it in one go, but you could also just dip into it as and when, and just read a little bit while you're sitting with a cup of tea in the sofa. I've found I'm doing that and then learning again. As normal, so if you please do put all your questions in the chat. We're going to try and answer as many, and Paul has already asked that even if we don't get them all answered, whether he could have them to learn from and maybe answer, and we'll send them out in a summary. But let's see how we go. Paul, welcome. And welcome from Mexico. I want to hear why you are in Mexico, first of all.
I'm here because my wife, who is Italian Argentinian, is building a fasting spa in El Pescadero in Baja Sur, which is her life has been around healing and being. She's always lived in a warm climate, and she never got used to Northern California. So, she's down here. We'll work that one out later because I like it up there. But that's why I'm here. And yeah, thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me. And thank you. I feel like I've been following in John Elkington's footsteps for Lord knows how many years, decades maybe. And never keeping up with him, neither on the literature, the amount of literature he's developed, but his ideation, his ideas, and his thinking. So it's really wonderful to be here with all of you and to be here with John. And hi, yeah. John.
No, I think I saw John join somewhere.
I did too. He's over there on the right.
Good, excellent. So, I was looking into your background a bit more because, of course, I've read your books. We've talked quite a lot. But then the thing that stuck out with me was sort of back in 1965, working with the staff in Selma. Did you always want to save the world? Were you that?
Well, I grew up on a university campus, which has pluses and minuses, and the University of California, Berkeley. And it was very active in terms of free speech, civil rights, et cetera, anti-war. And so I grew up in that atmosphere as if that was normative, that was like what people did and universities did, or students anyway. And so that's when the civil rights movement emerged. I'd lived in Berkeley. West Berkeley actually is got quite a large African American population. They came there during the war, and African Americans were brought in from the South, to build the Liberty ships in San Francisco. And so it had so I grew up with a lot of Black kids, basketball, sports, and that so forth. So to me, it was like a normal. You have a Jewish friend, you have a Black friend, you have whatever. When you're little, those distinctions are not so meaningful, noticeable to other people, but you just like shrug. And so when the civil rights movement started, then I just went down to Selma, and I became the press coordinator for March on Montgomery. And I can only attribute that to the complete lack of personnel at the time because I had no qualifications whatsoever. But I did get to then, in a sense, be the fly on the wall, and with the press, registering them. And you registered the press then to make sure that they got home safely. Wow. But yeah, so I, Jesse Jackson, Martin Luther King, of course, and so forth, when we call them SLIC, when SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Council, came in, they came in later. They didn't start the March on Montgomery. That was started by teenagers, 12, 13, 14 years old. And their constant beating when they crossed the bridge to try to go to Montgomery was what caused more and more people to come to Selma, and then eventually lead that march and so forth, and 2 people were killed and so forth. So it was a very strange time. But to me, I stayed in the South, and I was a photographer, and I worked for Congress of Racial Equality. And again, Bogalusa Meridian, where the 3 young civil rights workers were tortured and murdered and buried by the Klan. And so I was asked to go and photograph the Klan the first time they were ordered by the Justice Department not to march with hoods on, and then got kidnapped by the Klan and got saved by the FBI. But I remember the indelible memory is that when I'm in the car being whisked away by Klan members, another car pulled it over and ran it off the road. And the men actually in the car that pulled, forced the other car off the road, the car that I was in, got out and said, and excuse my French, but it was kind of like, and they both had the Southern accent. They said, "God damn it, Jimmy, I told you we can't do this shit no more." And I'm going, whoa, and who's that guy? That's the FBI.
Oh, wow.
And they all went to school together, probably played football together, probably, went hunting together, whatever. And so for me, what it's so valuable to be in a situation where there's hate, because hate is growing in the world, and it's not just Rwanda, Northern Ireland, or so there. To have that, to see how people who, how that was cultivated, because hate is cultivated out of fear and separation. It's not innate to human beings, and so for me, it was like a lens that stayed with me for the rest of my life, to see, especially in this time of division and polarization and the really almost pornographic manipulation of difference and divisiveness in order to gain power. So that was, it was you learn a lot when you're in those kind of situations.
Oh, absolutely. And I'd love your thoughts, because as you said, hate is growing now, and we've just seen both sort of anti-Semitism issues in LA, but really all across the globe, this division is happening, and hatred feels like on one hand it's building, and yet here in the UK there's laws going through that protesting will be very, very difficult. Civil rights, civil protests.
Yes.
And we've just had these Stop Oil Now throwing soup and I think mashed potatoes today in Germany, across a couple of, so and then you say, well, it's useful to be around hate because you learn from it. I just want to go more into that. And how do you feel about now? Is this a similar moment to back then? Is it, do you feel hopeful that we're seeing this now in order to learn from it?
I don't think Stop Oil or ER are hate groups at all. I don't.
No,
I think
neither do I.
No. To the contrary, I feel like that's speaking truth to power. And when I was in the civil rights movement, we got our ass kicked. We were also, the law was against us.
Yeah.
Okay. And we were arrested and I was jailed, and so to me, I see ER and that activism as very poignant, actually, and very courageous. And so I'm not surprised that, the law is trying to figure out how to prevent it and stop it. But I think it's going to grow and grow and grow, because the despair and we talked about this earlier, Louise, but I mean, Gen Z is the biggest cohort in history, and it's 2.7 billion and growing quickly. And I call them the new arrivals. They just got here relatively, and they're looking around going, what were you thinking? Which is the right question. That is to say, the older generations. And so I do think that we're going to see a courage and maybe some things that are inappropriate, for sure. when I heard about the Van Gogh in the National Gallery, I kind of winced but until I found out it was glass covered.
Me too. Yeah,
And then I
exactly.
go, okay, that's cool.
And then I worry. Then I worry, why people were so upset, because actually there was, in the UK, there was a lot of upset that this was not the right way to
Right.
protest. And I thought, well, it's quite a cheap way to protest,
But anyway, yeah, I just feel like that hate is actually an industry. And that's why in the book I wrote about the politics industry, and I don't think we understand it as an industry. We understand as candidates, there's Truss, there's Sunak, there's, whatever. Boris is coming back from his vacation. I mean, we see it on that level as almost gossip and this and that, and, as a sporting event. But underneath politics and underneath Brexit actually is companies who are paid to polarize and to confuse and to create fear. And it's a $20 billion industry and growing. It's in Brazil. It works everywhere in the world. And so that is what is informing our so-called debates. I mean, in the United States, and advertisements and so forth. So, but it's also what is really suppressing understanding and coming together around things that are truly threatening, which is, actually the environment. That is to say, the impact of global warming. And so I feel that hate is being cultured while understanding is being suppressed.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I had a conversation recently that you're just triggering that with the director and producer of Chasing Ice back in 2012.
Oh yeah,
Jeff,
that's a good friend. Yeah,
Jeff Orlovsky, and he was saying, I did Chasing Ice because I wanted to, I want to help with climate crisis, and then I realized that actually the industry behind the divisions, and that's when he did The Social Dilemma, which I didn't know that connection until I spoke with him personally, and the fact, and he was sort of, we cannot shift this, and we cannot win the climate crisis until we deal with those divisions, which is a very interesting way of looking at it.
I think it's important to understand that climate systems are social systems. Like there's this idea that climate is out there somewhere, and then we have society, we have all these other issues and so forth. Climate is a social system.
Yeah, it's and I think you say it, and I've heard you say it before, and I just certainly say it when I speak to people about, well, what is regeneration? I think, but the biggest thing is you have to, and shift is that you have to see yourself as part of that system, and if the system doesn't win, you don't win, and it's that breaking that division between, oh, there's environment out here and we're going to regenerate it, which you can't really do unless you see yourself as vested and as part of it, I would argue.
I think there's another way to look at it actually is from the inside out, because I think most people feel in some way alienated or not connected to society, the way it's sort of breaking into pieces and parts. And I see regeneration as a lens, it's a framework for oneself, okay, how to see the world, and then how to, and thus, once you, whether it's the CEO, by the way, or whether it's a whole corporation, or whether it doesn't matter what the entity is, it's a framework of understanding. And that understanding is based on a very simple observation, which is that we all grew up, we're educated to perform, to create, to benefit from extraction. In other words, in this extractive economy, it's said many times over, but the fact is we take it for granted. Our services, Google is the most extractive company in the world, you could say, in some ways. For example, it's extracting every little bit of information it can about you and then reselling it. And so what's happening, I think, especially in 2022, although it's been happening incrementally every year, but I think this year was, and it's not over quite yet, but was extraordinary in terms of the weather, frankly,
Yes.
and the impact of weather. And I was prompted by somebody to see, well, did the Po River ever dry up in history? And there's no account of it ever driving. Dante certainly didn't talk about it when he met Beatrice and the Ponte Vecchio. Oh wow, there's no water. I mean, there's no account, of that, or the Rhine, or the opposite, the torrential flooding, all that sort of stuff. But I think that what I'm saying about this is that I think the extractive road, which we are all on, by the way, and all participate in, and you can see the end of that road. That is to say, it doesn't really go much further. I mean, and so regeneration is, what would it be? What if we put life at the center? What if we had economic institutions and we acted ourselves, so that every step of the way we create more life instead of less? And so it's both a question and a proposal, and also emphatically within the book and so forth, examples of you can, and it works better. And I think one of the ways that I think the climate movement, in air quotes, but
Yeah.
I think one of the things that it did from the outset, because it came from science, 45, 50 years ago, there started to be a public awareness, and it was called the future existential threat, which is certainly correct. And but the human mind doesn't work that way, doesn't think about future existential threat when it wakes up in the morning. And it only thinks about that day in terms of existential threat, and then it'll go out further if you're more secure economically or socially. But the fact is and it went then from the 1970s, there was Earth Day, and then it went to shame, blame, and guilt. I mean, like Exxon, Chevron, BP, whatever. You guys are doing it. And then BP cleverly came out with Ogilvy Mather in 2001 saying, this is your carbon footprint. We're innocent. We just drill holes in the ground, make gasoline for you, but you can now calculate what impact you has. And so individuated the problem. In other words, it's a choice you guys are making, consumer choice. But all of that, and more since then has basically othered climate. In other words, we're fighting it, we're tackling it, we're mitigating it, and so forth. And as I say recently to people, and they sometimes look at me like in horror, but I say climate does not exist.
Oh, go on.
Find it, photograph it, hold it, measure it. It's a dynamic between warmer air and warmer oceans. Okay, that's what it is. And so we can name it as a dynamic. We have a dynamic right now, of course. I mean, so it's a dynamic, but it doesn't exist as an object. Weather exists, and that's the outcome of that change in the fluid dynamics of heating, water, and air. Okay. So, but the point being is that we look almost inside, we look outward for solutions and technologies and this and that. And there's no question we have to swap out our energy sources that, fossil fuel combustion is 80% of emissions. That's not in question. What's in question to me is the separation from the person or the institution or whatever level of agency that one identifies with actually the problem at hand. And feeling, as you said, disconnected from it, and it's remote, or what can I do? And all these things come up. But I feel like our biggest ally in the climate movement actually is weather. And because I feel like it moves it from conceptual to experiential.
Yeah.
And that's what happened in 2022.
We've been using, there's a beautiful and very scary NASA picture of the globe, with everything is red, and it's one of the most powerful slides at the moment, because that was this summer and everybody remembers. And still now, when it's meant to be cold in Northern Europe, it really isn't. And we're sort of all taking our coats off, but just having experienced and seeing it, that it's happening everywhere. Right. And I found that people then go, oh yeah, you're right. But it's still quite far to come. And one of my favorite things that you said to me, I think, is this idea that nature's doing fine. That's very clear, and it's us who's got a problem. I think that's
I didn't say nature's doing fine. What I said is, I hope I said,
I think
that climate is fine.
It's
just climate. It doesn't have feelings or emotions, and and that furthermore, it's supposed to change in every nanosecond, or we wouldn't have food. and glaciers and water and fresh, I mean, and so forth. So the whole, again, the rhetoric around it, you know, climate change is like, well, wait, that's not the problem.
It's human
You
change.
know, yeah, it's like we're the problem, and in the way we relate to each other, to our environment and so forth, you know. I mean, that's the cause. The cause is here right in front of us. It's not there. And but nature definitely will come back. I mean, nature will, you know, we might lose species forever, of course. In fact, we already are. But in terms of, you know, yeah, for sure, civilization's at stake. This is not as a commonly understood, but I think that, but we are at a time when civilization is coming apart at the seams, because actually we're in a system that has to actually come apart.
Yeah.
In order to reorganize, to, you know, has to transform, it needs to deform in a sense, you know, I mean, unform.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As I said to you, it's the one thing I'm holding on to as I'm seeing terrible news is I'm starting just to say, well, actually, that's just another sign that the system is breaking down, which is good, because unless it breaks down, we won't get the renewal. A couple of things I want to pick up on, because so language and how we talk is obviously incredibly important. As you say, climate change, no, climate doesn't have to change. And I think with the book, you've done a really good job with all the examples and so on. How might we make it even easier for people to understand? Because you know, I still have people saying to me, so now you're talking regeneration, we just got our heads around net zero, now you want something else. Is this just sort of confusion soup?
Net zero 1.5 C, I mean, carbon pollution, there's a whole list of you know, nouns and descriptors, you know, so forth, that don't mean anything to most people in the world. Nothing at all.
Yeah.
Regeneration isn't meant to be a new buzzword, although it has become very popular. As an English major, I'm going, oh, wow, you know, it's being used in remarkably odd ways. But regeneration is innate, though. It's as opposed to being a concept. It's innate. Every cell, all 37 trillion cells in your body are regenerating right this nanosecond, and this one, and this one, and this one, and this one, or we wouldn't be talking, listening to each other. So we are a walking, talking, you know, protoplasm full of regenerative cells and so forth. So it's the default mode of nature. Default mode of nature is regeneration. Okay. Furthermore, I think on a deeper level, anytime we express and act with care to another person, to our children, to our neighbors, to our family, to an animal, to a place, to, you know, whatever, care is the expression, the human expression of regeneration. Because what does care mean? It means you care for somebody's life or their existence or their suffering or their situation, or, you know, so this is innate to everybody. Yeah. And so I feel like regeneration is like coming back home. Nice. To what is innate and intrinsic to being a human being, as opposed to, you know, I did a person on the street, you know, man on the street interview in the United States. Now, so, you know, and said, what does 1.5 C mean to you? You know, I had a fake microphone, you know, and people looked at me like, who in the heck are you, first of all? I said, oh, I'm just, you know, doing a radio interview. And said, oh, 1.5, what are you talking about? You know, and I said, temperature. I said, what's C? Of course, we're Americans, so we don't.
Of course, you've got to,
And I'd say, well, 2.7 Fahrenheit. And they're going, 100 people, nobody understood anything about it. No, it's a fairly sophisticated place too. It didn't mean anything. And that's my point. It shouldn't. That's what I'm saying, is that climate lingo, we can't expect the world to become climate scientists or even half-assed scientists in order to make change. And so it's really important to understand that if you look at the solutions in regeneration and drawdown and so forth, and many other publications, I don't mean to just isolate those two, that were studied and measured and modeled and, you know, and citations provided for, they make life better for everyone on Earth. that they don't need to know about climate. We don't need to use that as the cudgel or as the guilt trip or as the, if we don't do this, we're going to be screwed sort of thing. We actually need to address current existential needs in the world. And that's 4 to 5 billion people who suffer every day, or at least wake up anxious every day about, and you're seeing that in the UK right now because of energy prices and, so forth. But so that's where we should be focusing on, is each other. How can we make a life? These things make a better life, as opposed to we want to fix that somewhere, which is such an abstraction for people, that then we can understand why 98 to 99% of the population in the world today does nothing about global warming, nothing. So how do we do that in 50 years? Convince 1% plus % of the people to be active and go to Sharm el Sheikh and the COP27 sponsored by Coca-Cola. How do we do that?
Yes. Well, I think you just gave it to us, right? It's about care and bringing it home, rather than using those morals and you should and big abstract arguments where people really don't understand the detail of it. That's wonderful. Thank you. Just thinking about Sharm el Sheikh, are you going to COP this year?
Oh, I've never been to COP. I don't find it a useful exercise. I'm not that socially adept anyway, and so.
I love that answer. I went last year for the first time, and I'm not planning on going back this year.
Well, they don't even have a green zone this year. Come on. There's just a blue zone. A friend of mine who's a singer on my board, A.Y. Young, African-American, Kansas City, he texted me from Glasgow. He said, I just sang, it's called the Regeneration song, by the way. It's really beautiful. I'll send it to you.
Yes,
so I just sang it in front of, 800 people in a black tie dinner in the blue zone. And I'm going, what in the hell? There's 800 people sitting down for a black tie dinner in the blue zone in Glasgow. Like, talk about the ultimate tin ear,
Yeah.
So yeah, I hope something happens, but I think I feel like, remember I said it earlier about the individuation of it, Ogilvy Mather, your footprint, use cold water, ride your bike, do this, blah, blah.
Yes.
Okay, no question, good things, important things, makes you conscious every day. So good idea. But the point of when we talk about nexus, which is in the URL of regeneration, we really talk about agency. Agency is what we have to focus on. Everything between these international conferences and our home, and and that's where you can make change. And whether it's in the neighborhood, the community, the college, the church, the synagogue, the temple, the town, the village, the county, the province, I can keep going. This is where we are operative, where we have respect, where we can make a change, where we have influence. And that's where we are focusing. I'm not saying we should. That's where change is happening, and we can make a difference. And so, and to not to feel isolated as an individual, like, well, what I do doesn't count,
No, absolutely. And at least in my mind, agency is sort of a basic human need, really, isn't it? It's why we're all here. And so it is so important. Sophie's just popped me a note saying Sharm el Sheikh is interesting because can you bring regeneration to somewhere where beneath the surface it's actually a police state that imprisons activists? Surely we can't ignore that. And you spoke with Sophie beforehand, so she wants to know what should we be doing? Should we be leaving them behind completely, or how do we deal with that, do you think?
I have no idea. I think of all the countries in Africa, that was probably the most inept choice of an African country, for COP. I think there's other countries I would have recommended it had I been asked, which I was not.
But probably, no, absolutely. I want to come back to the book. You mentioned obviously Drawdown, which is a fantastic book, and Regeneration. I just wanted to chat a little bit about, I guess, normally I ask what are the tenets of the book, but I actually think we've kind of covered some of that. It's a beautiful book. what was the hardest, how did you go about pulling it together? Because you've got very specific examples, but and yet you cover quite a wide variety of areas. So I'd be really interested in how you chose to focus on. Do you feel that it's completely comprehensive, or is there things you had to leave out?
I had to leave it out. There's 140,000 words, 256 pages. My publisher said stop. And so so there was things that were tossed overboard, or tossed aside. They're in the website, or going to be,
Yeah. Okay.
But it's vast, really. And I chose them because I felt a better understanding of them would be helpful. That's all, and so forth. And there's priorities and so forth. And drawdown, we map, measure, and model, and then these are the biggest solution, the next biggest, next biggest, next biggest. Really, that's incorrect and wrong. I didn't realize it at the time. It's a very American thing to do, the top 10 and all that stuff. What's number one? And when in fact, it really doesn't matter for two reasons. One is that there's no global solution, because a globe doesn't exist in that sense. The adjective is mistaken. And so if you map, measure, and model on a global level, you have data that means nothing to, it doesn't mean anything.
It doesn't,
it's
not got the context, right? It's the opposite.
It doesn't apply. Yeah, it doesn't apply to a canton in Switzerland, and so that's number one. Number two, as everyone, I'm sure there's many people here understand modeling very well, which is, it's all about assumptions. Yeah. It's like, and then, so we'll just put that aside. But I feel like, and then we inadvertently put the outcome in 2050 of the sequestration or avoided emissions in 2 decimal points. And I think that had, it gave people the impression of factuality. Well, 2 decimal points, they must really know. Yeah. No, we didn't. We just said, the model spit out, so again, so I feel like, we really need to, one of the really wonderful things about indigeneity and the cultures that exist today that are left, most of them are left, but in a remnant condition in many cases. But the fact is that they know where they live, and we don't. And I'm not saying everybody doesn't, but I'm saying if any countries know very well, it's actually the UK and Switzerland. When you take a citizenship test in Switzerland, you have to know the kind of fungi that grows in your state, and name it.
Yeah, I've done the UK one. It's similarly very interesting.
It's lovely, actually. Well, all the naturalists came out of the clergy in the UK, all that sort of stuff. So, but it's mostly people don't know where they live. Certainly in the United States, they have no idea. And the thing is that what I feel like the regeneration and what the climate movement in a broader sense is doing is recognizing observational science as opposed to empirical Western science only. And observational science, of course, I mean, that's biologists do that, sort of anthropologists. It's not new in that sense. But what I mean by that is that indigenous people lived in, place, for 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, 10,000, 40,000 years, okay? And so they know one thing, which is in nature, nothing repeats, ever. Amazing. And in science, if you can't repeat the experiment, then it doesn't count. And so you have 2 different sciences, which are very valuable, both of them, merging, I think, right now, in understanding and cooperation, working together. And that's really, really, really important, because I think that the understanding of place is also about falling in love with where you are. Adam Atsky, who's at the Royal Society in London, just published a paper, was it 6 weeks ago, I think, so forth. And basically he's, having electrical probes into our muscular mycorrhizal networks, okay? And basically they now have, they've detected 50 words, and they're speaking in sentences. I don't know, there's no consciousness in neurons, but there's senses going back and forth. In the paper, which is published he said the sentence structure of the mycelial networks is morphologically more complex than Indo-European languages. It's like, huh?
Yeah.
You know,
I'm sitting with
and
that
you
for
know,
a second.
and in a normal soil, you know, each plant has 1 million touch points to the hyphae for mycelia, you know, 1 million touch points, and somehow they're all coordinated about what they're exchanging in terms of phosphorus, nitrogen, you know, carbon, you know, it's like, it is so extraordinary, you know, underneath. It's in Toby Keir's that, you know, in Amsterdam and so forth. I mean, the science is coming everywhere now. And it's almost like the scientists are becoming shamans and the shamans are becoming scientists, you know, in terms of that understanding that it's all connected, you know, it's all connected, it's all intelligent, you know, it's all the whole thing, you know.
And
And
we've
then you
just
have
missed
Roger
it.
Penrose. Well, you have Roger Penrose at
Oh,
Oxford
yes.
saying basically consciousness, everything's conscious, not like we're conscious and what are they? No, the whole 9 yards, you know, is conscious and so forth. So I feel like we're in this moment of understanding, you know, that if I can express it in such a way that is fun to read, you know.
And you definitely do. So I'm buzzing with questions now. So, and I can see people are too in the chat.
Yeah,
So
let's have questions. Yeah.
as we get so a couple of things. So do you think, how do you think we'll describe this period in time when we look back?
Well, it depends on the outcome, doesn't it?
It does. But let's be positive. If we're positive, how do you think we would think about that, or neutral? If things, you know, if there is that future out there and the outcome is at least bearable.
It's you know, a whole epic ends and a new one begins, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just the Anthropocene, you know. I mean, not just, it's here. We didn't have a name for the Anthropocene until recently. We don't have a name for the next era. No, we don't.
Interesting, isn't it, that we name the Anthropocene just as we hopefully can start leaving some of it behind. And with the book, because I do think that you allow this exploration, at least that's how I felt when I read this one in particular, that it was sort of my exploration, but within the book. What has been your most interesting piece of feedback, either good or bad, that was surprised you through the...
You know something, I was with a group of people the other day, and people said, oh, you must get so much feedback on the book. And I said, none at all. Oh, wow. What? Why not? I said, how many of you, I think there's about 12 people in the room more. I said, how many of you read a great book and sent anything to the author?
Wow.
Okay. No one.
So okay. I'm going to just put out a call right now. It's now 5:43 or 9:43
right,
if you're in Mexico.
Right.
And within the next half hour, everybody on the call, if you have read the book, and it's okay if you haven't, you can go and buy it after. But if you have read the book, a little bit of feedback in the chat would be lovely. Let's have that just as we go, because we've got plenty of questions and we'll do those as well. So going back to a couple of people are referring back to some of your previous books. Paul Bolger is saying, how has your thinking changed in the intervening years since natural capitalism, which made a big impression on him at that time? Has your thinking changed? Is it the same?
I think the operative term, I don't think I used the term, but it was there, which is we can fix this. So natural capitalism is very much about, we can fix this. Look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this, you know. It's things, it's energy, it's systems, you know, and take a systems approach to it, you know, and system dynamics, you know, these are dynamics, you know, we understand that, you know, and so I think that, you know, and then, so then it transitioned, you know, I mean, to you know, ecology of commerce preceded that, which and then followed that was blessed unrest, of course, you know. So that's sort of, you know, blessed unrest is, you know, talking about what we're talking about even today, so forth, about humanity actually coming together, and the way you heal a system, or a way actually you don't, the way any system heals is to connect more of it to itself. whether it's an immune system or an ecosystem or so forth. I mean, that's how a system heals. And so in a sense, you could say the climate movement, or, there's not a regeneration movement. I don't see it as that important a word in that sense. It's because it is intrinsic, but these things are about reconnecting us and connecting to each other, to place, to understanding, to our children's education should be radically different. I mean, the way we educate our children is just, almost blasphemous to really to
Oh,
the
really?
living. Yeah. And so, but step by step, piece by piece, bit by bit, that is our task at hand. The thing that's changed for me is that, and this may sound a little bit odd, is that we need to fix ourselves. I mean, fix isn't how we do it, but we have to heal ourselves.
No.
Because we've all been traumatized. We've all been educated in ways that we later realized, that wasn't true. Oh, that is radically not true. And the word radical is important because that's root, self. And we also have to find our own, radical self.
Tell me a bit more about that radical self, and related to both the education piece, which we can talk more about in a bit, I think, but this, it seems that there's a need that we are more in nature in order to really connect to nature, if you know what I mean. And yet,
Absolutely.
we keep hearing that the trend still going on with people pouring into cities and so on. It might there are a few people saying, or maybe not, but how do we do this if we need more people in cities, or need in inverted commas, and yet cities don't really tend to have nature, and are not likely to have true nature for a while. What do you think?
Well, let me just, first of all, sometimes I call certain questions like Wizard of Oz questions, which is, if I answered the question, run, because I don't know. I really don't know. Second, I would say, however, with respect to urban environments, there is an amazing amount of work being done in terms of rewilding and renaturing cities.
Yes.
And so in terms of sound, that is quiet, in terms of air, healthy, in terms of greenery and blossoms and pollinators and creatures, present. In the United States anyway, we're uncovering streams we buried. Put a city here. Get the stream is in a tunnel. So that is happening, and that to me is very, very regenerative and so forth. To reimagine what a city is, and as opposed to. So I wouldn't. So, and I think the concentration of people in urban environments actually is a very ecological thing.
Okay.
That's where people have the lowest footprint of any place in the United States per capita is New York City.
That's fascinating. Is that because the flats are so small?
No, it's because you're close. It's a walking city. You walk like crazy.
Yes, no, true.
It's public transport city, the subway, just like London. There is, it's higher in terms of the height of the buildings. They're, cheek by jowl, there's no space in between. And so they're easier to heat and cool, So what I'm just saying is that I actually think there's some, some intelligence is going on here, that people don't know themselves about concentrating, because we can, in concentrations that are humane and supportive, we can have a much lower footprint than we do suburbanizing, of course.
No, absolutely. And our friends at Dark Matter Labs, who are looking, working quite hard on this idea of trees as infrastructure and green and blue infrastructures is quite interesting. Good. Let's, I'm trying to look. I just want to touch on the drawdown thing, because Ran has put something in that also, when you said, that top 10, I've been using that top 10 and the girls' education piece quite heavily here.
Great.
So please don't take that away from us. So that's all.
No, but it doesn't matter whether it's number 3, number 4, number 6, or 10. It's for the girl.
Yeah.
That's good enough.
Exactly.
That's
all
it.
We needed to do is
the
be
girl soon to be a woman, and that you don't need to know where it ranks.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And the and John made a comment about blessed unrest and the sort of future for civil society NGOs, and then Teen added to it. So she runs an NGO, and she said she's been speaking to partners in Zimbabwe, and the squeezing of civil society is deliberate and getting worse, and new laws being put in place that will allow government control of NGOs and so on. How do you have opinions on that future of NGOs, of civil society? You know, as we almost started with, that the governments are trying to clamp down somehow on protest, on doing things slightly differently.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, you know, we're moving towards, you know, proto-fascism and, you know, worldwide. And so fascism doesn't exist with the free flow of information, you know, can't exist. So it's not surprising that that's what we're seeing, you know, around the world. I mean, within countries that are moving towards fascism, or you can call it different things, you know, populism, demagoguery, this and that, but it's all a variant of the same thing, which is highly concentrated power, you know, that can only maintain that power unless there is suppression, you know, of dissent, of vote, of, you know, opinion, and, you know. I do think one of the things that we are trying to do is, I think, you know, the environmental movement, and to John's point too, has been paid, that is, contributions, whether they're from foundations or individuals or companies even, have been rewarded in a sense to be hierarchical. I don't mean hierarchical in terms of their structure as people, but, you know, like, you know, all roads lead to, and then you go there, and the URL has, you know, all these different aspects and facets. They almost all use a drone flying over, you know, wilderness or nature. Now you go on, whoa, look at that. You know, but the point being here is that we have to connect laterally. We're all separated, the organizations. I don't think the people are, so forth. So what we want to do, and we want to do it with you guys, of course, and John and I and Damon have spoken about this, but we want to create a lateral way to connect, so that if you get interested in regeneration, put the term aside, because there's so many ways it expresses itself. So that may not be the lingo, that's fine. But you can go in, and then you can travel to, whether it's country or by focus or by any other, you know, criteria you want to know what's going on with respect to, you know, in Botswana or Boston or Belgium or Japan and so forth, with respect to the subject or an area that you want to be curious about, that you want to know more about, that you do know a lot about, you want to connect your organization to others and so forth. We lack that connective tissue. The good thing about COP was the green zone, really. That was that was antenna brushing against each other and pheromones and all that stuff. You know, I mean, that was very useful.
Yeah, pollination.
You know?
No,
Really important. And that's gone. At least it's gone for this year. So I feel like we need a way that that doesn't make your URL or your organization, I mean, the center, because there is no center.
No.
And so, and then you could link to things that maybe don't have a organizational, you know, structure of civil society as defined in that country. But that doesn't mean that groups of people aren't coming together and working together to restore, to renew, to regenerate, you know, on a social level, for housing, for health, for farms, for forests, for creatures, for water, for the list goes on.
Yeah.
And that's who people want to connect with. They want to know, especially, you know, I talked about Gen Z, and especially when you just come into this, you want to know, is there a we here, or am I just part of a small...
on your own? The sustainability industry, I guess, has trained companies so well in reporting and so on. So once you say, well, this is not so much KPIs, this is more practices and how you approach things, that then throws a really interesting complexity in the mix for them to deal with, right?
I told the companies I work with to do your ESG reporting, take away all the photographs, all the, take away all the color, all the glamour, just like, here's the data, you want the data, here's the data. But if you want to communicate with the world, actually create something that people want to read, because nobody reads that stuff. It goes into the round file.
Yeah.
And who would want to? Except you have to, you do read it. Of course, you're an analyst, but that's it, And so we being, however you want to define, really don't know what's going on, both inside these companies, and the number one ESG company in the world is Imperial Tobacco, it is number one. Okay, and so obviously people need a deeper understanding and want to have a sense of connection or criticism, by the way, which is, hey, enough of that. But now we don't have that with ESG. I don't think we do.
No. I always kind of come back to I think it was Mattis Wagenakel who said it to me first, was there's a first fundamental question is your company doing something that the world needs? If not, let's pack it up and not even bother with the ESG and anything else on it.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that one later.
Which is quite an interesting one, right? Big companies like Ford, like Solvay, and actually we've seen a few more smaller companies splitting off the sort of legacy and the future business units into separate companies to give that space. I always say that often when innovation and transformation has to happen, you see the immune system of companies, right? Starting to react and try and kill that new thing. And so this is obviously one way of avoiding that and saying, no, we're going to have our EVs, if you're Ford, in one business and the old stuff in another. What do you think to that?
Well, they're all about shareholder value, right? And if that's the metric of the world, then that's the outcome of the world. And so the world we have today and the way it is done magnificent things and doing terrible things and so forth, all goes back to shareholder value.
Yeah.
I mean, slavery was about shareholder value. Remember, everybody? I mean, so this is deeply embedded, in our culture, and so and it's still omnipresent. The transition I see is when the institution, like, the thing about money is that it's not their money. We call it OPM. Okay. Everybody who's investing, analyzing, doing it's OPM, but other people's money.
Other people's money that they're using.
Exactly. And so they have a job description. And if they fail, then they get fired. If they succeed, what is success if you're an OPM person? Which is, constancy, return, risk avoidance, et cetera, growth, of course. So as long as that situation is there, you don't have companies are going to take a risk because there is nobody home.
Yep. No, we have to change that parameter, as you said, their job description and what success looks like, right?
Well, the world will change it for them. I'm confident about that, because that blinded way of looking at it is going to encounter the way the world really is.
No.
And then, they're going to realize, wait a minute, we were unprepared. We went this way when we could have gone this way, or we didn't listen to this little division, or we could have, and so forth. And so, I mean, the penny will drop. It's just a question of when.
No. And I feel we're seeing some of that, right? We're seeing some of, because the risks are mounting. And as you said, as you rattled off, part of that job description is manage risk and avoid it. So as the climate risks and the social risks are coming up the curve, the argument is getting slightly easier, I suspect. Oh, I'm seeing Paul Haney is saying, can we have other people's value, OPV, instead?
OHV, other humanities value.
Yeah, exactly. Really interesting. let's just make sure we don't miss out, because a few people have mentioned finance and so on, but also we'll come to that. But there's a question from Marissa I think is interesting, which is, what are your experiences with engaging people in power in the psychology and practice of care? You know, we talked about care being the humanity's expression of regeneration. Have you got experience in there? And then Joe is extending it with, oh, and if fossil fuel combustion is 80% of emissions, how do we get them to care, the fossil fuel companies?
Yeah. Well, in the last thing, in both of them, I mean, the last question is about perverse incentives, you know, and so the incentives are perverse in the world today, you know, and so we see the outcome of that. And really, another way to look at regeneration is actually alignment. That is to say that what we do is in alignment with what we know about life. We don't need to know any more about life to know how to be in alignment with it. Okay. And so a corporate or, you know, entity that wants to be, you know, a survivor and, you know, flourish, moving ahead, it's really about step by step by step, you know, it's not overnight, but, you know, coming into alignment, you know, it works better, it's cheaper, there's more benefits, and there's less risk. Okay. And so, but you're going to get resistance to that when you have, again, about the fossil fuels. It's like, well, who's in charge here? No one's in charge. I mean, there's CEOs of, you know, the big companies. I'm not saying that's not true, but in terms of the flow of capital to and from, you know, which is the loans, the, you know, obviously the investor, the shareholders, and so forth. And if you know who it's like,
It
there's
is
nobody home,
the
you know.
system, isn't it? No, but that's
It's
it.
a
I
system.
remember
Yeah.
being so
Yeah.
sort of fascinated that when Bernard Looney, when he'd recently taken over BP, and he declared that they weren't going to give dividends because they were going to invest in sustainable technologies and take a longer term view, and people were up in arms because
Yeah. Yeah.
his biggest shareholders were the pension funds.
Yeah, exactly.
And who'd promised the
Yeah.
pensioners a certain return.
Yeah.
And so he was getting so much pushback from that, and that link between the social now and the crisis now, and we're seeing it, I guess, with the energy crisis, right? That we can't, lots of countries are saying, well, we can't transition as fast as we want to, as we had planned, because we now have the issue with Ukraine and so forth, and a huge cost of living crisis. So it's that interesting balance where my sadness becomes, it's not happening fast enough, but also that it seems it's still, again, it's Gen Z, it's the younger generations that are on the losing end of that. The pensioners are going to get their money, but actually the young people, and it's both their future and that investment in that future that we're not doing as fast as we really should.
No, we're not. I wish we really, truly were in a world that honored elders,
Me too.
which is what that is being invoked. Oh, well, we have these pensions, you know, I mean, we do not have such a world, you know, although I understand that pension argument. Yeah,
I completely agree.
But I still feel like the thing is, you know, if we step back and look at the IEA came out this week, I mean, the fact is that, you know, renewable energy is going to be the cheapest form of energy, electricity in the world, and electrical transport is going to be the cheapest way to get around.
Yep.
And so that's inevitable now. It's writ large. It's done. It's a done deal. And nothing that the fossil fuel companies can do with coal, gas, and oil will change that, and so forth. So really, it's an interesting, you know, dynamic that is playing out in front of us. And there are obstacles to that, which is the concentration of fossil fuels, you know, in Saudi Arabia, Russia, you know, Venezuela, Brazil, and America too, for that matter, gives them inordinate power, you know, which we're seeing with the Ukraine-Russian situation, you know, and over other countries. I'm involved, is tangential, but in a way, with Tri-Alpha Energy, TAE Technologies, been involved for 14 years. And it's a fusion company started 24 years ago, completely different than every fusion company out there in terms of its fuel design, how it goes about it. What's interesting about it is that They just raised $500 some odd million, but there was such interest in this year from countries who are watching Germany and, Russia, Ukraine, France, UK, and going, we don't want to be dependent on anybody going forward. We want energy sovereignty.
So interesting.
And so forth. And then looking at TAE technologies, as a way to achieve sovereignty, because it can be right there. The fuel for TAE fusion is borax. It's soap, it's detergent, it's boron. So it's cheap, it's available, it's not a war material, doesn't have radioactivity, and all that sort of stuff. But the point being is that I think, we hear about the dynamic in Europe particularly, but in the political dynamic of high energy prices, inflation, obviously everywhere in the world and in the United States. But I think that underneath, though, we don't hear about the people who aren't saying anything, which is those other countries are going, I don't like this at all. I don't want to be Germany. I don't want to be, UK. I don't want to be dependent, on the geopolitics. So, yeah. It's a fascinating time. It's really fascinating.
Such an interesting time. And it's all coming in. We're talking a lot about that everything is being politicized, that the agenda is politicized, and businesses are going to have to accept that and can't hide from it in a sense any longer.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean, so the extent to which they into that.
I have a question.
Yeah, go.
Did Greg Watson have a question? Because
Yeah, Greg Watson question. Greg and Ran actually both talked about your view on the current economic model and how is it able to capture regeneration, and how could finance economics evolve to do better regeneratively?
I think it goes back to what I was saying about pragmatism. To see regeneration as idealistic or the right thing to do or altruistic, to me, is a mistake. And it may check those boxes as well, which is cool, no question. But that's not the lead.
No.
The lead is practicality, which is, are we a company that is actually moving towards a livable future, or or viable future? Let's just say viable for us, or not. And so that's where economics, frankly, comes to play, which is, and the thing about the hierarchy of a corporation is that the person at the top is supposed to be thinking the longest term out, and the person who's the janitor who's cleaning the offices at night is thinking about that night. Okay, so there is this, a hierarchy of vision in terms of time, and that's where economics comes in. And the short-term, quarterly, every quarter, report, so forth, and highly overemphasized to me. But I think the corporations, can really make a very, very good, a very clear statement about where they're going and why, and, watch this space and help us if you have any ideas, rather than, we're going to resist or fight, or, this is, which is what you see, corporations, or they're being completely lying.
Gosh, I'm aware of time. It's flown. Thank you. I want to come back a little bit to this idea of care, because one of the things that has come up in conversations I've had recently, both with people in corporations and with young people and sort of all over, is how, and we've talked about it actually on this book club with Laura Storm, about being regenerative, and what does that mean for personal life, and how do you balance, so a couple of things, how do you balance being a change maker and working really hard on convincing other people, on writing, on your job, whatever that is, and with a life that also is regenerative and potentially local, and taking care of your family, whether you have small or old children, or your partner, and not partly not feeling the guilt. I spoke to somebody today who's dedicated his life to climate and to a certain extent to regeneration, He said, oh, but my daughter actually needs me, and I feel guilty both ways, because I feel like I should be doing this work with businesses, and yet I should be here. So I wondered if you would talk about how do you manage to balance this? What have you got any top tips? Because you've obviously been doing this a long time, balancing family, and I know your son works with you, or one of them, and which I think is wonderful. So yeah, just love to hear how do you take care of Paul and Paul's family?
I think I'm just guessing, but between I mean, 1914 to 1946 was a really difficult time for the world, right? 2 world wars and a depression in between, and in many places a horrific time in the world. And I feel like we're entering, or we're already in that situation, and we don't see it yet, and many people don't see it. When I wrote the subtitle Regeneration, Ending the Climate Crisis in One Generation, it wasn't about fixing the whole thing and hey, we're good to go. First of all, because the assumptions that underlie many of the activities around global warming and climate are, can we just get back to business as usual, and those can we, I can have all my toys and I can, fly around and I can go on cruise ships or whatever. And that's not the world we're going into. We're not. So we're going to a very different world. We don't know it yet, understand it fully what that will be, because we're co-creating it. And I feel like that it's important to actually feel the tension, because it is there. So it's not like you can do something magical, and because if you're a sensitive being, and you're reading and you're aware, which is what everybody here and most of us have to do in order to be even functional, you're going to feel grief, you're going to feel horror, sometimes you're going to feel agog, like I can't believe this is happening now, today, in 2022, like what world am I living in? And you have family, you have children, you have friends, and you have a life, and so forth. That balance, if there is such a word, is applicable, is something that all of us are going to have to work on within ourselves. It's not like there's an answer. And so, and as I say, in my work, at least the way I try to communicate in the written word is to create spaciousness for people's minds, not to create an outcome or a conclusion or and the reason I do that is because it's so hard to change my mind. And so if it's hard to change my mind, why in the heck do I think I could change somebody else's mind? It's like, that's not possible. So, and I think there's a tacit narrative in climate literature, some of which is fantastic by the writers, but I know you don't listen up.
True.
And Rebecca in The Guardian, and also it's cool, it's great, the beautiful, amazing people, Rebecca Solnit, but I think we have to move to a different narrative, which is one like that is more open and more listening based. And we talked earlier about nature and so forth. I feel one of the things I said to a meeting in Japan where they published Regeneration, and it was called Wisdom 2.0 with Japan, but we talked about listening. One of the attendants had heard me talk about that in San Francisco and said, what about listening? Tell me more about listening. And I said, I feel like if you, yes, go outside for sure, where it's peaceful, where it's quiet, take nothing with you in terms of, communication devices and so forth, and just go to stillness and stay in stillness, or notice that there is no stillness. And that's interesting too, within your mind and body or whatever. But when in that listening and that openness and so forth, we will know who we are and what we want to be and what we want to do going forward. That's where you find it. You're not going to find it online or this or in books. And I'm not discrediting them, since I do go do it.
You're writing them.
Yeah, writing them and so forth. I'm just saying is that it's we do know what to do. And there's analogy to this, talk about diet, food, this, that, because food systems are 32% of global emissions, you know, from farming to production. And what I say to people, what should I eat, and this and that and so forth, keto, paleo, you know, vegan, you know, all that. I said, you know, stop eating the things that harm you. We know what those are. Those are that, you know, or drink them or whatever. And your body will tell you what you should eat. You listen to it. It knows, you know. That's just so beautiful about the human body, you know. And all animals know, so we're animal, and it's in with us as well. So I go back to that question about life balance, which is you have to find that place within yourself so you're not acting out of the urgency of the situation, which is real. And I think the other thing it's helpful, because especially with younger people who feel overwhelmed by the science and the news of the impacts, you know, and the growing a number of impacts that exist in the world: too much water, too little water, too much heat, you know, all the vagaries, the variations of climate, from, you know, basically jet streams gone wild. That's to be, you know, basically a Broadway show, jet streams gone wild. That is what's happening right now. And to actually really acknowledge the science. The IPCC is the most incredible human science endeavor in the history of civilization. That's the IPCC, you know, Hosanna, praise on it. Oh my gosh, incredible. Okay, but then you have to draw a line and say, got it. Thank you. I'm grateful. Now, let me go to work.
Yeah.
But you can't take that with you in every moment, every day, and or every other day, whatever, sort of, because it does. Then you're going to be always feeling guilty if not, you know, it's never enough, it's never enough, it's never enough, you know. Of course it's never enough, but the point being is that we really have to free ourselves to be the most vital, enjoyable, you know, and this sounds frivolous, have fun regenerating the world, have fun, make sure you're singing, make sure you're dancing, make sure, you know, because we're all kids and we all played in the playground and we always went to where the kids were having the most fun. So we're still those people, and we need to create a movement that is dead to right serious in terms of the science, but also very dedicated to creating connections and like a song and story and narrative and activity that gives people a sense of purpose, meaning, and dignity, and that's what we all want.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Paul. And it's perfect at time, and I'm holding on to, you said, you know, we're all co-creating the new world together, and doing it while we're having fun, I think is perfect. I can see Jessica's also picked up on that one. So thank you so much for taking an hour and a half and sharing your wisdom. It was beautiful. I see lots of smiling faces, which is wonderful. Thank you all for joining. If you feel like it, you can unmute yourselves now just to say goodbye, and then we'll end very shortly after. Paul, we need one link of you, I think Sophie said, so we'll just hold on to you for a bit longer.
Okay, great. Thank
you
you so much. No, thank you, Louise. Thank you, Sophie. Thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
I would love to be in the room with you and listen to you and meet you. I mean, it's just a fascinating group of people. I know some of you by name, so.
Well, next time, well, I was going to say, we'll all meet at some point. We'll do it live, I think.
Right.
2.5 years and we haven't managed, but we will. Thank you all.
Love to
Thank you.
Thanks,
very much.
Thanks,
Okay.
Paul. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.